probably everybody's already using active imagination. Everyone sort of has knows how to use an inner child with the stimulation. When somebody needs a resource, if they're looping, we call a loop or a block. So we go in with a stronger person or us as an adult, and you sort of rewrite the narrative. Right. And so that's basically what active imagination is. Jung uses it more where you can enter a dream. Like if you have a dream and you're curious about, I wonder why this person's in my dream, you can kind of go into a relaxed state and just put yourself back into the dream, and you can have a dialogue with these different characters in the dream to get information about the dreams.
In this video, I'm talking with Dr. Andrew Dobo about EMDR and Jungian Psychology. Andrew is an EMDR therapist, consultant, and a trainer. And he is also trained as a musician, so he sees EMDR as a creative and artistic approach. In this interview, Andrew will explain the relationship between Carl Jung's theory and practice and EMDR therapy. We will talk about the benefits of making the unconscious our ally, especially when doing EMDR, and some techniques that Jung taught us about a century ago and that we can still use in the context of our EMDR work. Andrew will share some of his own personal experiences, how he integrates Jungian psychology and EMDR. So here is the interview. Dr. Andrew Dobo, welcome to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thanks so much for being here.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me, Rodham.
Yeah, so Andy, I invited you to the show to talk about Carl Jung and EMDR and what they have in common, how they're different. And I want to start by talking about your book. So in your book, Unburdening Souls at the Speed of Thought, Psychology, Christianity, and the Transforming Power of EMDR, you mentioned the word psyche a lot. So two words, actually, psyche and soul. Can you explain these words? These are not words that we see a lot in traditionally in EMDR books. So can you explain the concept of psyche and soul?
Yeah. When we think about Jung, the thing I love about him, you have the dreams and symbols and images, these things that sort of come up in our life. There's just sort of this vastness of our psyche, whether it's our dreams or images, things that we sort of see in our dreams that we've never experienced in our life. And so to me, the psyche is just that sort of vast wealth of images. And I think maybe you could almost interchange it with the word soul, but sometimes that's a scary word for people. Mm-hmm. So psyche is sort of a word that's not exactly extremely scientific, but not religious. So it seems to be a safe word. But my understanding and the way I view it is this just sort of vastness of our human psyche, of our human mind, and just opposite of the limiting psyche, or the limiting psyche that we kind of, when we're working with cognitive therapy, everything gets so limited and narrow, and it's just kind of, I think, the opposite of that.
Right. Yeah, we know that Jung definitely broadened, learned a lot from Freud, but broadened a lot of his things. So, Andy, where do you see the connection between EMDR and Jungian psychology?
Well, EMDR is a psychoanalytic process. I think initially Francine Shapiro, it was called EMD, and she thought it was like desensitization, kind of related to exposure. But then as she was trying to get people to just stay on an image, their mind would wander. And in her brilliance, she realized, what's that? And so you kind of observe it and realize that she understood that this is like a psychoanalytic process. So we even use the word like, okay, think of this image, think of this thought, and then free associate. Well, that's a psychoanalytic instruction, right? And so it's a psychoanalytic process. That's what it is. So it's not a big leap to include some Jungian thinking, because some of the material that often presents itself is psychoanalytic, but we don't know what that language looks like. In fact, that's what my course was like. I did a lot of teaching that, and people were practicing and starting to hear things that they would typically ignore and say, no, 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 that has value, even though it seems like it's absurd or nonsense, and you realize it's not at all. So that's kind of, what the course is like, and that's how Jung and EMDR, they're really a good marriage. I mean, EMDR is like, it jumpstarts this process. Like Jungian psychology is slow. Give me a dream, let's talk. EMDR gets things started so fast, and it happens really quick right in front of you. You don't have to wait for somebody to go and have 6 dreams and come back and see me. It happens right in front of you during the EMDR process. So it's very compatible. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about that we can't ignore the unconscious, which again, like you said about cognitive behavioral therapy and some other therapies that are, kind of limiting our view. In the book, you talk about not ignoring the unconscious, but making it an ally. Can you talk a little bit about that? How can we make the unconscious an ally?
Well, that's a Jungian idea where the unconscious, it'll function as an adversary or it'll function as an ally. So it functions as an adversary when it tries to get your attention and you're ignoring it. So if you have an issue that you have to deal with and you ignore it, and you could do that for a long time. I mean, you could do that for decades, right? But then one day, you walk in an elevator and you've been in this elevator 1,000 times, but on this day, you have a panic attack, and you don't know why you have a panic attack, but you have a panic attack. And now everything's changed, because now the unconscious is like, you're done avoiding this. If I have to get your attention by attacking and being an adversary, then it does. And it does. So it's getting your attention. So even though it's functioning as an adversary, it's still just, an ally trying to get you to do what you need to do. So a lot of times pathology is because people just avoid. And that's really kind of the first step of the process is avoidance. But then usually people show up in our office and, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't bear it anymore. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but what do I have to do to feel better? And then the second stage is surrender, to get things to move in this kind of model that I talk about in my book. And so the adversary and ally thing and it's not it's not like there's this other personality inside. If you have a toothache and it bothers you a little bit and you ignore it for a while, it's going to get worse. It's right. Not anything so dramatic as, oh, this is really strange. What do you mean my spirit is going to attack me or something? It's just, there's this thing that happened to you or that you need to address and understand. And if you're not willing to do it, then your unconscious is going to give you a nightmare, start some pathology, something's going to happen. And that happens just all the time.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about something you share in the book. So in the book, you talk about a dream that one of your clients had, and you said that it made you consider the EMDR process as a death and rebirth sequence, a Jungian concept of transformation. Can you explain that process?
The dream. There was a lot of dreams like that. There's one where one of my clients had this dream where she dreamt of finding this beautiful leather-bound book with gold writing on it, and the title of the book was "Sometimes in Death, a Friend You'll Find." And this was at the end of her therapy, where she had really had a lot of trauma, made a lot of progress, and she was almost finished with our work. And that was early in my career too, with EMDR. And I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure that title out, right? So her old self has died. She has this new birth, and in the process, she found a friend. That would be me, right? The therapist, the companion. So that was, that sort of exemplifies that.
Yeah. You talk about that more in going through your own process, which I really appreciated. You said that this is a quote from your book. I stopped feeling like a psychologist, but instead like a guide or companion. And near the end of the process, more like a midwife or who would assist the person through his or her darkness into a new life, a midwife of rebirth. So I'm curious about your own process as a therapist or as a psychologist. That what happened to you during this process?
I had to back off. Right. So we know that EMDR is a self-healing process. And Jung would say the same thing. He said, I mean, in his Memories and Dreams of Reflection, he talks about how I realized I had to put the theories aside, put any intention aside, and just ask general questions just to see what the client would bring me. So again, that's a hands-off kind of approach. So it's not, all this stuff I know. You go to graduate school to know stuff. I'm supposed to know things, and here this approach is I don't know, and that's a wonderful thing, because if you don't know, then you're really curious about, and then you become this receptor, and you become real sensitive to things that maybe you wouldn't have noticed earlier in your career, in my career, but you start to notice these things to move the people, the clients through the process.
Right.
I don't know Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what Jung, what distinguishes Jung from Freud and, all that psychiatry community in his time and maybe in our time too, that he was not only, Freud was very symptom focused, but Jung was a whole person's therapist. Well, he wasn't a therapist, he was a psychiatrist, but he did therapy back then. Psychiatrists used to do therapy, and he really emphasized the importance of a whole person therapy, looking at the person as an individual. And one of the things that he talked about is the individuation process, one of the important concepts. Can you talk a little bit about the individuation process, what it is and how it's related to EMDR?
Well, individuation just means to become what you're always meant to be, right? Like an acorn wants to be an oak tree, right? And a baby lion wants to be king of the jungle, right?
Yeah.
And each of us have our own individual goal to be our authentic self, our true purpose. What exactly is that? So the individuation process, that's kind of the goal. But in order to do that, you have to have self-awareness and you have to be conscious, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? I think dreams are a really good way to start to do that, because dreams, they're amoral. They don't lie. They don't deceive you. They're going to tell you the truth. They don't make the news. They just report it. So if you're doing something stupid, you're going to have a nightmare. If you're on the wrong track, if you understand the language a little bit, your dream will let you know that. Also, therapy is a good way to have some insight. But it's really when people aren't aware, aren't conscious, that's really where, individuation stalls. Jung would say there's sort of the wall around the ego is just impenetrable. And so new information, creative information can't occur. So they just have, to get political here, but these QAnon people, you can't get through their psyche. There's no new information. There's no creative influence. They're stuck wherever they're stuck. And so those folks are very hard. They're not individuating. And there's a lot of other reasons, we know that people who abuse drugs, there are development arrests and all that. So, conscious it's a lifelong process.
Right. So you talked about the language of the unconscious, and we know that Jung developed specific methods to get deeper into that language of unconscious, and one of them was active imagination. What is it? What is active imagination? How can we use it when we work with our clients, specifically with EMDR therapy?
Well, probably everybody's already using active imagination. Everyone sort of has knows how to use an inner child with the stimulation. When somebody needs a resource, if they're looping, we call a loop or a block. So we go in with a stronger person or us as an adult, and you sort of rewrite the narrative. Right. And so that's basically what active imagination is. Jung uses it more where you can enter a dream. Like if you have a dream and you're curious about, I wonder why this person's in my dream, you can kind of go into a relaxed state and just put yourself back into the dream, and you can have a dialogue with these different characters in the dream to get information about the dreams. So that's basically what it is. His red book is years of him having these internal dialogue with these internal characters in his imagination. So, but it's, we use it in EMDR. Extended resourcing is active imagination.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful and healing. I don't know. I usually train my folks when people have loss and grief, a lot of times they want to talk to the person that passed away. So we have them, figure out a place where they can go do that. And you turn the stimulation on and you have that conversation with the person that's passed away. And that's usually a very profound experience. I mean, it becomes very, very real. It's not in your imagination, not real. We know how powerful that is and how healing it is. Just like, people commit suicide because of what they're imagining. It's not real, but it's real, very real enough where somebody might take their life. So we're using it on the healing end, right? In EMDR and, Jungians with their, entering into the dreams and getting information to understand things better.
Yeah. So active imagination can be used both in the resourcing phase, what we call preparation phase, and also like the example you gave during active reprocessing, if we're doing like grief work, that can be also be used.
Usually phase 2, phase 4, those are where you would use those.
Yeah. I want to ask you about a quote that you bring in your book. It's a Jung quote, and he says that chaos and confusion are necessary ingredients for psychological transformation. Can you talk about why that is? Why chaos and confusion are necessary for transformation, or what we call healing?
I don't know why that's the way it is. I just know that's the way it is. And if you think about it, a really wonderful example is, Prince Harry. Apparently he had EMDR. I don't know what he did. I don't know what his therapist did. But if we look at this sort of model, a transformational cognition like I don't matter, right? So he gets this sense and he's getting EMDR, and his core belief, it might be, just as an example, I don't matter. Okay. Mm-hmm. The Queen matters. The monarchy matters. England matters. My brother everybody matters. I don't matter so much. So he does some EMDR and it shifts to I do matter, right? So if I do matter, I can't live back here where I don't matter anymore. It becomes just impossible for me to live in that environment. So he doesn't know how to matter because he's been told his whole life what to do, where to go here, say here, go to school. He has no idea how to matter, how to make these decisions on his own. So you dismantle the old way, and he's left in a state of chaos and confusion. If you want to see chaos and confusion, just check out what Harry's up to. He has no clue what he's doing. Is he a celebrity? Is he a prince? Is he English? Is he going to be an American? He's got no idea what he's doing. So whenever you use EMDR on some of these cognitions, your client will leave their family, become estranged from their family, especially if they're treating the client like they don't matter, and they usually are. And then they could change jobs because they will pick a job where they don't matter. And now they can't do that anymore. They might relocate. They might, guess who they married? They married somebody to treat them like they don't matter. Now they can't do that anymore. They can't stand this person. So they might end up in a divorce. So that's chaos and confusion. That's a recipe. You dismantle somebody's core negative belief, and they don't know. It's a fight to figure out, okay, so what's the adaptive? That's the individuation. And EMDR is like individuation on steroids. Okay, like you can have somebody unhappy with breaking apart that I don't matter cognition in 2 or 3 sessions, and they have some new insight on things. The view of themselves changes, the view of others changes, the way they engage the world changes, and the way they allow the world to engage them changes. And so whenever that happens, the family's going to reject you. It's going to resist and sabotage you, or it'll accept you if you go back to the old way. Just like with Harry. Yeah, they took away his security detail. They're not giving him any money. Oh, he's not going to get this title. The family's trying, they're doing exactly what's going to happen to your client. So maybe it's not, it's not so public, but it's the same process that happens. So that chaos and confusion, there's no way around it. If you break away the old way, they have to figure out the new way. But until they do, they're a bit in chaos and confusion.
Interesting. And I think Prince Harry did a lot of good PR for EMDR with his.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Video.
Yeah, he absolutely did. Yeah.
Yeah.
He still needs some. He still needs. Well, an interesting thing about him too, he said in an article that he was afraid to go back for that funeral of his grandfather. And so I use this as an example with my trainees. So he needs a future template on going to see what was the scariest part about going back, and you do a future template with him, and you can help him out like that. So, so he's a wonderful teachable example. I hope he figures it out,
Yeah. Okay. So one more quote from your book that you brought from the red book, which I think that's what's right behind you, right? Is that the red book?
Yeah. The one I have the real one. That's really about 2 feet by 4 feet, and it has all Jung's drawings and things in it. But this is the readable version.
Yeah. So this is kind of where the art and science of EMDR merge.
Right.
Jung said that the soul is everywhere scholarly knowledge is not. Intuitive knowledge is superior to argument and reason. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I love the science behind EMDR. I mean, when someone, and I still hear it, maybe you hear it, oh, EMDR, there's no research. Like, there's no research. There's like 500 studies, 40 longitudinal studies, 30 some years of, so I'm really glad that solid scientific research is there. But so I sort of liken it to, in Florida here, you can see the shuttle go off when it was going off. And if you've not seen that in person, it's like a heavenly, Helios' heavenly chariot across the sky. It's mythic. It looks mythic, but there's a lot of science going on in there. There's all kind of scientists and everything to get that thing to fly. So I think EMDR is like that. Like, we have this scientifically solid and sound vehicle. And once we start that vehicle, it's what happens in between. What is this client saying? And then that's like the art of it. Like, why would I go with this and not that? And how can I get this client to move through to get him to phase 5? And if somebody comes in with a dream, am I going to use that dream in a context of EMDR or not? Or, those kind of decisions that we make. And even like something simple as, like we were talking earlier, I play jazz. And so sometimes the best thing to know how to do is when not to play. Just stop and it's somebody else's turn. So it's the same thing with us. The better you get at being a therapist, I think you know when to just be quiet. And if there has to be a minute of quiet and silence, you're just kind of cool with it. And earlier in my career, I might have been nervous about sitting there for a minute or two, but not anymore. So that's, I think the art is on many levels. I think not just with the EMDR, but certainly Jung. And one of the examples I use and when I teach the course is, like, Jung he talks about a big Gothic cathedral. And he says, so you can talk about the engineering and you can talk about the mineralogy and the architecture and all this stuff and how they built that. But what Jung wants to know is, why did these guys do that? What's the why? Why did they take the time to build this thing? So that's more like, an artistic question. Why is it like this? Why does it look like this? Why did they do this? So I think it's a really wonderful balance when you can add the art to the science. And I don't know if maybe it's not for everybody, but I was trained as a musician in the 70s, and I'm a right brain kind of guy. I'm not a very good researcher,
Yeah, no, I agree that I think the best combination is drawing from both the art and the science of EMDR. So, Andy, one more question before we say goodbye. I want to ask you, how do EMDR therapists get better at being EMDR therapists?
Well, there's a number of ways. I had really good consultants. William Zango, I think, was really great. I worked with him. He did my basic training, and then there were no calls when I did the training, and I knew I was going to need some help. And so I immediately started working with him for certification. And then also I sought out Roy Kissling. Roy's been doing it a long time. I worked with his friends. So I think, working with really good people, and listening, not being defensive when they offer suggestions, and just, trying to be as teachable as you can. And then just don't be afraid to do EMDR, just do EMDR. And then if you have questions or something comes up where you don't know if you handled it right, there's consultants all over the place. I think it's just a good idea to just, find somebody and ask questions. And I think the certification process really accelerates skill level. I know when I certify people, they do transcripts. We listen, we break apart every session, every word. Why did you say that? Why you missed that? And not being critical, just being like a coach, really. And I think that the folks that I work with, they do get, a lot better, a lot quicker than just doing the basic training, falling off without more supervision and just, having at it. It takes longer.
A lot of consultations, definitely.
Getting your own therapy, being a client on the other side is also helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets rid of this cognition, because if you have the cognition that I'm not good enough, and then somebody doesn't show up, then you get upset. You think you did something wrong, and then you're obsessing about that. And you can't be like that as a therapist. You got to clear your stuff out, I think. And EMDR is a wonderful way to do that.
Absolutely. So consultations, a lot of consultations. And I would say also with different consultants, sometimes you get something different from working with a different consultant.
Absolutely.
Doing your own EMDR therapy.
Yeah.
Dr. Andrew Dobo, thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful.
You're welcome, Ron. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.